Thank you, Luca. Yeah. Now, Rene, Foertsch, it's good to see you this morning, and it's a pleasure to be up here on stage. I think it's the third year now. And by the way, I will already say, I'm speaking for Bloomberg. Covered bonds on Bloomberg now and next, but don't worry, even if you're not a Bloomberg customer, even if you don't have a terminal in front of you every single day, there should be some bits and pieces in this presentation that you can take away as well in terms of market facts, and yes, it does work. My role at Bloomberg, just to give you that piece of information, I'm a market specialist. That means, well, I'm a little bit the entertainment department, but also the support department. Yeah, I'm not in sales, so I'm not here to sell you a Bloomberg terminal. I've been with Bloomberg for 20 years, and I've seen bits and bits, and I sometimes say I know the one or the other thing about the market. So let's dive right in. I want to touch upon a whole potpourri of things today, looking at primary markets, then also secondary market. Data, as Luca mentioned, high quality, good data that you can then use in an AI context. And of course, I couldn't be here in front of you today without touching on the topic of AI. And then lastly, also looking at programming, how to program your own applications using Bloomberg data. Now, first comes first, primary markets, and this is a good one. I've only sat last week with Stefan Rakelsch, the head of capital markets at Erste in Vienna, and we were speaking about our Bloomberg league tables. And I will tell you already one thing: up until September last year, these league tables, covered bond league table on Bloomberg, they were a complete disaster. We've received very, very negative feedback. But we took action, and Stefan told me last week, finally, after 15 years of me complaining, Bloomberg has managed to put together a proper covered bond league table, and that's what it is. You find that league at covered bonds on Bloomberg. What have we changed? Well, first of all, we are now reflecting the market that everyone, I guess, primarily wants to see, which is the euro-denominated syndicated covered bond market. There are criteria behind there. You can look through that on Bloomberg. Looking back to last year, so our table was already live. The good thing was, once we changed the criteria and what this league table represents, also the history automatically fell in place. So going back in time, you can take a look, what the history was. Last year, we've seen Natixis and in the number one spot, and they are looking at history. That's actually quite interesting. First time since 2015, but in the meantime, since 2015, they arrived second, six times, yeah? I'm not going to go into the details of what happened last year. We had some strong performances there, Bayern LB, Helaba, the emerging force, they are now called, and also Erste Bank. Looking at on the right, how does this year shape up? And what I find quite impressive is that we are now at the beginning of May, and if you look at the bottom in terms of total issuance coming into the league tables, we are already at more than half compared to last year total, also in terms of deal count. So, and that despite, of course, not to mention what's happening in the world. Moving on, I told you there is more behind these tables. It's not just showing you the data, giving that into your face, but also looking back history on the left-hand side. I've touched upon that, which are the lead managers that had the largest share in the table over the last years. Also graphical information in terms of issuance here showing, I believe it's 2014 onwards, and deal count. On the right, there are also some nice charts and depictions that you can create here, looking at the country of the issuers. And the first line to interpret that, Germany last year, 33.8 billion in issuance, and actually it was the DZ Bank most active lead manager within or for these German banks. There is more data behind these tables. As an example, I give you down there the red box where it says other countries. If you click in there, immediately you've got to look through to the bonds. Yeah, I think that is something that's very important to us when we display information, that you have the full transparency and the click-through ability in this case to actually get to the bottom. Now something entirely new that's going to come out for Q2. My colleague Sven Gerhardt, who should be here with me today, he's going to arrive tomorrow. He tells me he's in court. allegedly he has to give a witness statement, and I'm still not entirely sure because, he's from Frankfurt, the capital of crime, as some Germans say. Maybe he's involved in some dodgy dealings. I wouldn't hope so. You see him tomorrow. He and his team have worked on a chart book for covered bonds, which we will be publishing under Newswire NH chart books. I leave it to you to look and screen the content that we are planning for this chart book. We've put together a Q1 test release, and you see two of the charts, the graphs that would be included there. Geographically, where did we see the highest issuance volume, and the bottom middle chart in terms of a quarter-to-quarter comparison here, starting from 2017. So this should be quite interesting and probably save also the one of you a lot of time if you were to try to put something similar together yourself. Moving on, and here this is really a practical piece for you if you use the Bloomberg terminal. I get asked that so many times. Is there a good primary issuance market monitor on Bloomberg? And yes, there is. I always say there's many ways that lead to Rome on the Bloomberg system. But you can also build your own, yeah? And people have been asking me, I tell them, and trust me, the next month they ask me again, it didn't quite work. So actually here in this presentation that I believe will also be distributed afterwards, I put in a step-by-step guide, yeah? It's very easy. Looking at the Bloomberg search functionality, SRCH, any Bloomberg user on the fixed income markets will know that. I put together first my criteria, quite simplistic. For example, I want to exclude retained deals. By the way, we do have a flag on Bloomberg to say this is a retained deal, this is not a retained deal. I want to look at issuance volume sub-benchmark at least, and then let's say priced over the last year. I save this search, and immediately I go, next step, to WGO worksheets. I call it Excel on Bloomberg, yeah? And once you open W, it more or less looks like an Excel sheet, yeah? You get a box that asks you, what information do you want to include in this sheet? And very simply, you would choose insert a list of securities, a list as in my search that I have just built. And already, and you see that at the bottom, the first version of my primary markets monitor is finished. I sort the issuance by pricing date, and you see there at the top last week, there's a CMark bond coming out. So already I'm halfway there. The sheet holds the information I want to see. By the way, each time I go into this sheet, the information is also current and updated. Yeah, I never need to touch SRCH again because the SRCH is running live in the background, populating my sheet anytime that I open it. And here, this is my ready-made sheet, and I'm happy to share it with you if you let me know that you might want it. Yeah, it is rather large, so it's two screen grabs of the left and the right-hand side of my rather large sheet. At the top, you see more, let's call it characteristics information of the instruments that came to market, issuance amount, tenor, and so on. And at the bottom, it's where it becomes a little bit more interesting because there we've got metrics and analytical data. Final guidance, initial guidance, the tightening that we observed, the spread to benchmark at issuance and current spread. That's quite an interesting topic as well, because if you speak to credit sales, for example, they might have customers where, let's say, 2 weeks ago, they tried to buy into a covered bond on the primary market. Unfortunately, didn't get any allocation. But then, 2 weeks later, the bond might actually be sourceable in the market, potentially cheaper than when it arrived into the market. So this is something that this sheet would immediately show you. There's the cover ratio, and there is also a new issue premium, NIP calculation. That again, we have so much information on our system, oftentimes the problem is actually really that people don't know or where to actually find it. I've got something to help you with that later on as well, but I want to make a point on the NIP calculation, because here I'm showing you something. Don't take any photos. Well, I don't think it's that interesting that you would take a photo of it, yeah. But this is a Bloomberg internal page on the left. I'm showing it to you, even though you can't access it. I'm actually pitching internally for making it accessible. But this is our algorithm that calculates independently the new issue premium on newly issued bonds. And how does it do it? It's important to understand. We freeze the market on the day of the announcement. So before announcement takes place in the market, we look at the issuer's curve, and we also look at the swap curve. So we freeze that market before it gets known to the market that there is going to be a bond issued. And then on the day of pricing, we look at the level, and then we make the comparison. Yeah? It is a very independent approach, as in we don't rely on any DCM syndicate departments to tell us this is the NIP that the bond came to market. It is completely calculated on our side. And I gave you an example down here. Sometimes what we calculate here is largely different from what you might hear. Here, a banker is quoted. So on this Arkea deal, the banker said they offered a 2 basis point premium, and that was the February issue. Our analysis actually said, no, it wasn't a 2 basis point premium, it was actually -6. Yeah? So I'm not saying, no markets are moving fast these days, and there could be other considerations. There's certainly a time lag between when we freeze and when the final pricing occurs. So admittedly, this is an approach with a methodology behind. I'm not saying we are always absolutely right and it can't be challenged and questioned, but I think it's a very interesting independent approach. We want to continue working on that. There is one downside of it. The algorithm at the moment is very, very strict. I give you one example. There was a DZ-HYP they issued, I believe, in January, and it was a tenor of 10.1 years. Unfortunately, our algorithm couldn't compute because the longest bond in the market, even though DZ-HYP has a beautiful curve in the market, but it was not reaching to the 10.1. So it's unfortunately I can't compute. Yeah. So I'm speaking with our product managers there. I already told them, look, if we can't compute that for a DZ-HYP, then I don't know. We may as well pack up. So this algorithm is going to be improved in the near term to also cover more instruments. Moving on to the secondary market, I will keep this topic short, but I will tell you over the last 2 months, this is my favorite topic that I almost talk to everyone about. It is with regard to post-trade transparency, the MiFIR review. ESMA RTS 1 and 2 that became active in the EU market on the 2nd of March in England, in the UK, already active since November last year. Why am I talking about that? Well, because in the covered bond context, we often also touch upon the liquidity and how often get covered bonds actually traded, what's the turnover in the market, and we might say it's a more illiquid market. Yeah? But here, what this MiFIR review has now done, essentially since the 2nd of March, we've arrived in a trace regime in Europe. Yeah? MiFID II was literally introduced to say we need more transparency, we want to understand when trades are happening in the market. But, and to give you some numbers, up until the 2nd of March, on our side, trades that actually took place in the market, around 4 to 5% only were real-time reported. So once the trade is done, reporting goes out. After the 2nd of March, this number has gone up to 80+%. And that's why I really recommend to you, it is now worth it to look at trades that have happened in the market. And where can you do that? Well, our trading platform, AllQ, there is a line there under the Bloomberg sources. It's called Last Trade. Never made any sense to click in there. I myself never clicked in there up until 6-7 weeks ago. Now it makes sense, because what happens if you click in there, you get a trade recap at the bottom, which you can actually also pull into a launch pad. Yeah? And on that trade recap, now I'm filtering for BFTF, I think, BTFT, that's the Bloomberg APA. Again, I can't go on into much of a detail, but these authorized publication agents, there are multiple in the market. Bloomberg has one, TradeWeb has one, Market Access has one. Yeah? Essentially, those are the sources through which the trades get reported into the market. Yeah? And now, for example, here on this Commerzbank bond that I found as an example, you see in the third line down there, no, you see 3 lines, BTFT. There were smaller trades, 100,000 euros traded, and the reporting, execution time, publication time on the right, happened on the same day. There is more information. MFIT is a page that gives you the classification, yeah, because also in the new regime, there is a classification scheme. There is 6 groups, and depending where you fall into the 6 groups, where the bond falls, different reporting requirements may apply. There's this colorful photo there you see at the bottom, which goes into detail about G5. G5 is the group for covered bonds, and you see the volume thresholds, as in how large may the ticket be to such that it would need to be reported in a real-time fashion. Now, you can aggregate this information. This is very beautiful, I found. Again, THEG is trade aggregation. What I did here is I ran a simple search again. I said, give me all active covered bonds in Europe, in this case, in euro currency, and that was all. And then I loaded that list into THEG, and what has it done for me? Looking at the last 3 months, immediately it gives me an issuer overview in terms of in which issuer has the most trade activity occurred, real-time reported. I see Commerzbank at the top there. I can click into Commerzbank, and then I even get down to instrument level to say these were the most active bonds, covered bonds in the market issued by Commerzbank over the last 3 months. So I think this data, having the ability to look at that market, a lot of it real-time reported, is really interesting also for buy-side clients if they make the decision to maybe buy a covered bond in the afternoon. Was it already traded in the morning? Data, very important topic to us. Luca mentioned it initially. I've got my colleague Sana here today with us as well. This is just to let you know, we've now also incorporated mortgage pool ESG information, that information coming out of HTT sheets. On the topic of data, there would be much, much more to say. One exciting one as well, if you sometimes look for issuers' cover pool reports, often you find them also on web pages, in the internet, etc. We are now making them accessible over the last 2 quarters on a function that is called DS. Document search, yeah. So within DS, you can look for cover pool transparency, and you will see all the reports that we store on our system. Again, there would be much, much more to say. 3 years ago, we talked about our FIGI, or as some people abusively call it, the FIGI. It's the Financial Instruments Global Identifier that we assign to cover pools to essentially allow any data person, a data scientist, etc., to work with cover pool information better using a unique identifier. Moving on, and here now we are hitting the topic of AI. Again, I can't possibly go into the depth of what we do in conjunction with AI on the Bloomberg. Anders spoke about AI evaluation earlier. We have launched on our system our own generative AI tool, yeah? And if you look at the interface on the left, very similar to maybe if you use a ChatGPT and so on, quite intuitive in terms of how you can use that. I wanted to show you 1 or 2 use cases. Yeah, we've introduced that to the point earlier I said sometimes it's difficult to find information on Bloomberg. You don't know where to look first. So you can use it as like a Bloomberg assistant. Here I asked it, show me a list of data fields Bloomberg has available specific to covered bonds, and it gave me a nice overview there, but it also tells me there is many, many more. There is Euro covered bond premium indicator, for example. Some of this information hidden in the back of our database. We are still working on making it more transparent. The DES pages we offer on covered bonds are meant to be revamped to show more of the information that sits in our databases. But moving on, actually, putting this tool to good use. And I say, if you work with AI these days, and I guess everyone does, or referring to generative AI tools, LLMs like a ChatGPT, I'm strongly in favor, and I hope that the future will also be that we not all going to come to work and say, we've got a job to do, a task to perform, and please AI do it from A to C. I mean, hopefully that is not, going to be the future state. I think AI can support us because we still want to also introduce into any analysis that we perform our own knowledge and experience, yeah? So this is what you can do already with this tool, and this is the prompt up there that you see. Jokingly, I also like to say, nowadays the person who prompts the best is the more the better, the more knowledgeable, perceived as the more knowledgeable person compared to maybe a university student 20 years ago. The best in the university used to be that one that was perceived to be the most knowledgeable. Nowadays is the one who prompts the best. Yeah. So here I asked the tool, take a look at the global and the Euro European covered bond market in euro currency, look at data fields, cover ratio, and the new issue spread analysis, and give me some overview of what you conclude. Immediately it gives me some key findings. I'm not going to read through that. And on the right hand, even produces me immediately a chart, this one ranging back to May 25, showing me European versus global new issue premium, and at the bottom cover ratio. I think that is really, really impressive. Yeah? I will say this tool we say beta at the top is still in development. There are still things it potentially in the future, hopefully it can do better. We've got a major release planned for the second half of this year to look in particular at fixed income. Yeah, but already today, I think quite impressive. I leave you here with a last example, and here not worth going into the detail at all, but here I asked what are the typical overcorrelation levels for European covered bonds. Came out with this two-page answer. The one important fact to state, because you might ask yourself, well, now Bloomberg has also got this generative AI tool. How is that different from using a Claude or a ChatGPT? There is one very important difference. This tool will not look to the outside. It will not go to Reddit. It will not go to any unverified source. It sticks within the Bloomberg world, the Bloomberg infrastructure, and we believe that is the big strength of this tool, because it can tap right into the wealth of data that we have in the system, news reports, bank research, etc. But all of that is essentially Bloomberg verified. And lastly, I told you, AI, similar topic almost, like programming, tech topic. We can also program on Bloomberg now using bQuant. bQuant is a tool also introduced last year, and I will say, looking at the world today, Ask B, our generative AI, and bQuant, had we not introduced them last year, maybe the year before with bQuant, we would already be at a major disadvantage now, because everyone expects, if you look at a system like Bloomberg nowadays, that there would be an AI component and there would also be a programming part to it. So the programming part, that is what bQuant is, and I leave you with one example in our library, and I will already say, you don't need to be an advanced Python programmer. Yeah? Typically there is maybe one person that takes care of programming an app that then other people can be using, because that's the idea behind bQuant. At a desk, someone might say, I'm typically running this and that, I can't quite get there on Bloomberg. Could we build an app that does exactly that job for us? And this is an example app that we have built, a heat map, SSA, and covered. Quite self-explanatory. You see, you can choose the countries you want to take a look at. We give you SSAs, covered, governments, and senior preferreds, and that app essentially then classifying the bonds that it finds into maturity bins, maturity brackets, and depicting, going back in time, where have we seen the most significant spread changes. So a helpful tool that can be nowadays easily also programmed in our database. And I leave you with that. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions, please do speak to me or my colleagues. Thank you.